The old hospital groaned around Daniel. Each creak of the floorboards and sigh of the pipes felt like a whispered warning. He was used to the soundtrack of the night shift, but tonight felt different. The air hung heavy, thick with a silence that felt almost expectant. Daniel, a young nurse with tired eyes and a weary smile, finished his rounds. He checked charts, dispensed medication, and offered a comforting word to restless patients. The routine was familiar, a balm against the unsettling quiet of the hospital at night. He glanced at the clock on the wall, its face illuminated by a faint, flickering light. Almost midnight. The witching hour, some of the older nurses called it. Daniel usually scoffed at superstition, but tonight, even he felt a shiver run down his spine. He was about to make himself a cup of coffee when the silence was shattered. A piercing alarm cut through the stillness, its urgency undeniable. Code Blue, room 208 East Wing. Code Blue, room 208 East Wing. Daniel froze, his blood turning to ice. Room 208, East Wing. That wing had been closed off for decades, deemed unsafe after a series of unexplained accidents and patient deaths. It was a place of whispers and shadows, a festering wound in the hospital's history. He had only heard stories, hushed tales exchanged between nurses in the break room. Stories of patients who died mysteriously, of equipment malfunctions, and of spectral figures glimpsed in the darkened hallways. The East Wing was a ghost story, a place everyone avoided. His heart pounded against his ribs, a frantic rhythm against the silence that followed the dying echo of the alarm. Was it a prank, a malfunction, or something more sinister? He knew he should report it, call security, but an uneasy curiosity took root in his gut. He found himself drawn to the elevator, an invisible force pulling him towards the forbidden wing. The alarm was a siren song, beckoning him toward the darkness that lay at the heart of the hospital. The elevator groaned its way up, each floor announced with a shuddering clang. The air grew colder, the fluorescent lights flickering as if struggling to penetrate the encroaching darkness. When the doors finally creaked open, Daniel was met with a wall of stale, stagnant air. The hallway was cloaked in shadows, dust motes dancing in the faint light filtering through the grimy windows. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of his own breath echoing in his ears. It felt like stepping into a tomb. He walked slowly, each step heavy with trepidation. The numbers on the doors were faded, barely visible in the gloom. He ran a hand along the wall, his fingers tracing the outlines of peeling paint and long-forgotten grime. As he approached room 208, he noticed something strange. The door, which he could have sworn had been closed, was now slightly ajar. A thin sliver of darkness beckoned him closer, promising answers and whispering warnings in the same breath. Daniel pushed the door open slowly, his heart pounding against his ribs. The room was shrouded in darkness, illuminated only by a sliver of moonlight spilling in through the window. The air was thick with the smell of dust and decay, the scent of time and neglect. He flipped the light switch, but nothing happened. The bulb had long since burned out, leaving him stranded in the suffocating darkness. He took a hesitant step inside, his senses on high alert. And that's when he saw it. In the center of the room, bathed in the pale moonlight, was a hospital bed. It was empty, the sheets rumpled as if someone had just been lying there. But what chilled Daniel to the bone was the fact that the bed was moving. It rocked gently back and forth, a slow, rhythmic motion that seemed to defy the laws of physics. There was no one pushing it, no breeze rustling the sheets. It was as if the bed itself were alive, animated by some unseen force. Section 5. Entering the Abyss. Daniel stood frozen, his breath caught in his throat. Fear, cold and sharp, clawed at the edges of his composure. The dimly lit corridor seemed to stretch endlessly, shadows dancing on the walls as if mocking his hesitation. He wanted to run, to flee back into the relative safety of the bustling hospital, but something held him rooted to the spot. It was as if an invisible force was compelling him to stay, to face whatever lay ahead. He took a step closer, then another, his gaze fixed on the gently swaying bed. The air grew colder, the silence pressing down on him like a physical weight. Each step felt like an eternity, the distance between him and the bed shrinking yet feeling insurmountable. He could feel his heart pounding in his ears, the blood rushing in his veins. His mind raced with questions, each one more terrifying than the last. What was causing the bed to move? What was the source of the light? As he drew closer to the bed, he noticed something else. A faint glow emanated from beneath it, a soft ethereal light that seemed to pulse in sync with the bed's movements. The glow was mesmerizing, almost hypnotic, drawing him in despite his fear. It was as if whatever was moving the bed was also the source of this otherworldly light. The light seemed to have a life of its own, flickering and shifting like a living entity. He knelt down, his hand trembling as he reached out towards the glow. His fingers tingled with anticipation and dread, the cold air around him intensifying the sensation. His fingers brushed against something cold and smooth, sending shivers up his arm. The object felt unnatural, almost alien, and yet there was a strange familiarity to it. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and then, with a mix of fear and morbid curiosity, he peered under the bed. What he saw would change everything, a revelation that would haunt him forever. The glow, he realized, was coming from an old, leather-bound journal. It lay open, its pages filled with faded ink and spidery handwriting. Above the journal, almost forming from the shadows themselves, was the faint outline of a figure. It wasn't corporeal, not in the traditional sense. It flickered in and out of focus, translucent, a wisp of something left behind. The figure was hunched over, as if in pain, and Daniel could have sworn he saw a pair of sad, accusing eyes staring back at him. He recoiled instinctively, scrambling back from the bed as if it had burst into flames. His heart hammered against his ribs, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. He had stumbled into something he wasn't meant to see, something that should have remained hidden. But even as fear coursed through him, a strange sense of pity welled up in his chest. The figure, the journal, the eerie rocking of the bed. It all spoke of a story untold, a pain left to fester in the darkness. He couldn't just leave now. With trembling hands, Daniel picked up the journal. The leather was cold and slightly damp, as if it had been recently touched. It felt like a relic from another time, a silent witness to untold stories and forgotten sorrows. He opened it carefully, his eyes scanning the faded ink. The handwriting was elegant, almost archaic, and the words were filled with a deep, palpable sorrow. Each page seemed to echo with the voice of its author, a man long gone but whose pain was still very much alive in these pages. The journal belonged to a patient named Victor Halloway, a man admitted to the hospital decades ago for a mysterious illness. His name was barely legible on the patient tag, but it was clear enough to send a shiver down Daniel's spine. Page after page detailed his suffering, his fear, and his growing certainty that something was terribly wrong. Victor's words painted a picture of a man tormented not just by his illness, but by something far more sinister. Victor wrote of shadowy figures lurking at the edge of his vision, of voices whispering his name in the dead of night, and of a cold dread that seeped into his very bones. These were not mere hallucinations, they were experiences that left him paralyzed with fear. He begged the doctors to believe him, to help him, but they dismissed his pleas as delusions brought on by his illness. Their skepticism only deepened his despair, leaving him isolated in his torment. As Daniel read, a chilling realization crept over him. The events Victor described, the strange occurrences, they mirrored the stories he'd heard about the East Wing. It was as if the journal was a key, unlocking a dark chapter of the hospital's history. The unexplained accidents, the patient deaths, the whispers of something sinister. It wasn't just a ghost story, it was a haunting reality that had been buried under years of neglect and silence. Daniel knew he had to uncover the truth, no matter how terrifying it might be. He flipped through the journal, his heart pounding as he neared the end. The entries became more frantic, the handwriting wilder, more desperate. Victor knew something was terribly wrong, something that went beyond his illness, something that threatened to consume him entirely. And then, on the last page, a single sentence scrawled in shaky, desperate handwriting. It wasn't the illness, it was this place, this room. Below the sentence, a final chilling detail, a childlike drawing of a figure with glowing eyes lurking beneath a bed. Daniel closed the journal, his mind reeling. Victor's words, his fear, it felt as real and present as the dust motes dancing in the moonlight. He had stumbled upon a tragedy, a life cut short under mysterious circumstances. As he stood to leave, something on the dusty floor caught his eye. There, written in the layer of grime that coated the floorboards, was a single word, formed from what looked like a finger dragged through the dust. Help! Daniel felt a cold shiver run down his spine. The word was freshly written, the dust disturbed as if moments ago. He could almost feel the presence of someone or something that had been there just seconds before. The air was thick with an unsettling energy, making it hard to breathe. But how was that possible? He was alone in the abandoned wing, alone with the ghost of Victor Halloway and his desperate plea for help. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional creak of the old building settling. Daniel's mind raced, trying to piece together the mystery that was unfolding before him. He glanced back at the bed, the faint outline of the figure still visible in the shadows. It was as if the shadows themselves were alive, shifting and moving with a life of their own. The figure seemed to beckon him, drawing him closer to the edge of sanity. Was it Victor, trying to communicate from beyond the grave? Or was something else lurking in the shadows, something that had kept Victor prisoner all those years ago and was now reaching out, its touch extending beyond the grave? The questions swirled in Daniel's mind, each one more terrifying than the last. As he backed slowly out of the room, his gaze fixed on the word etched into the dust, a terrifying thought took root in his mind. What if he was not just witnessing a haunting, but becoming a part of it? The realization sent a jolt of fear through him, making his heart race. He had come to the East Wing seeking answers, but he had stumbled upon a truth far more terrifying than he could have imagined. The walls seemed to close in around him, the weight of the past pressing down on his shoulders. Every step he took felt like a step deeper into the unknown. The East Wing wasn't just haunted by the ghosts of the past, it was a conduit, a bridge between worlds, and something on the other side was reaching through, desperate for help, or perhaps something far more sinister. The very fabric of reality seemed to be tearing apart, and Daniel was caught in the middle of it all, unsure of what awaited him in the darkness.